she cried, when the rancher pulled the iron arrow from her chest, until she realized he was bleeding. The sun was warm but gentle that afternoon, spilling golden light across the wide-open fields of the ranch. Birds sang in the trees, and a soft breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. Mara, a young woman with a love for nature, had come to the ranch to photograph wildlife. She had been fascinated by birds since she was a child, always carrying her camera wherever she went. This particular ranch was famous among birdwatchers. It had wide stretches of forest, a quiet stream, and old untamed areas where rare species often nested. Mara moved slowly along the edge of the forest, her camera hanging around her neck. Her eyes scanned the trees and the tall grass. Every now and then she crouched to focus her lens on a bird perched on a branch or a squirrel darting through the undergrowth. The day was peaceful, almost serene, and Mara felt a quiet thrill in exploring a place she had never visited before. She had learned from the locals that the ranch had been in the same family for generations. Thomas, the current owner, was known for being kind but serious about his land. People said he knew every inch of it, from the thick forest at the back to the small creek that ran across the property. Mara had never met him before, but she was told he usually didn't mind visitors who respected the land. She thought she might catch a glimpse of him while walking near the stables or the barn, but so far she had only heard the distant clopping of horses. As she walked further into the woods, Mara's attention was completely absorbed by the natural world around her. She noticed a pair of cardinals darting between the trees, their bright red feathers flashing in the sunlight. She raised her camera, kneeling carefully on the ground to get the perfect shot. She focused, held her breath, and clicked. The sound of the camera shutter seemed very loud in the quiet forest. After taking several shots, Mara decided to move deeper into the woods. She was careful with every step, mindful of roots, rocks, and the uneven ground. The forest became denser as she went further, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in golden patches. Every now and then she paused to observe birds, small insects, or the way the sunlight created shadows on the forest floor. It was peaceful and beautiful, but Mara also felt a quiet sense of excitement, like an explorer in a new world. Without realizing it, Mara had wandered into an area she had not seen on the map of the ranch. It was a little more wild here, with fallen branches, thick grass, and old trees leaning at strange angles. The ground was uneven, and the air smelled earthy, with a hint of wet soil from a small hidden stream nearby. Mara noticed something odd, a rusty piece of metal sticking out of the ground. She bent down to look. It was part of an old arrow, probably from decades ago when someone had used this part of the forest for archery practice. Mara reached out, curious, but as soon as her fingers touched it, a strange, sharp noise made her jump. Before she could react, the old arrow, which had been lodged in a small wooden trap, was triggered. Mara screamed as it shot toward her chest. The pain was immediate and shocking, and she stumbled backward, falling to the ground. Her camera slipped from her hands, landing a few feet away, but she could barely notice it. Her vision blurred and her heart pounded with fear and confusion. She tried to call out, but her voice was weak and trembling. Every breath was sharp, and a strange warmth spread across her chest. Panic surged through her. She had always been careful in the outdoors, always prepared for small accidents or insect bites. But this was something entirely different. Mara's mind raced. She remembered reading about first aid and emergencies, and tried to stay calm, telling herself to breathe, to focus, to stay conscious. But fear made it hard to think. The forest seemed to spin around her, the light flickering through the trees like dancing shadows. She heard a voice calling out her name. "Ma! Ma!" It was deep and urgent. She tried to focus and realized the voice was coming from the direction of the ranch. Her eyes, though blurred, caught sight of a figure running toward her through the trees. Thomas, the rancher, was moving quickly, his long strides closing the distance between them. His face was serious, focused, and Mara felt a tiny spark of hope. Thomas reached her side in moments that felt much longer to Mara. He knelt beside her, his hands steady and sure as he assessed the situation. "You're hurt?" he said calmly, his voice low but firm. Mara tried to speak, but the pain in her chest made it hard. Thomas's eyes were sharp, scanning the wound, and he gently told her to stay still. "I've got you."
"Don't move. You're going to be okay," he said, though Mara could see the tension in his face.
He carefully examined the arrow, noting its position and the angle at which it had struck. Mara's breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to stay calm. Thomas's hands were firm but gentle as he checked that no major arteries were hit. He reassured her again, his tone steady, a calming presence amidst the fear. "It's going to hurt when I remove it, but I need to do it. You have to trust me." Mara's eyes widened at the thought, tears already welling up. The pain was sharp and immediate when the arrow was removed, but Thomas's steady guidance helped her through it. He pressed a cloth to the wound to stop the bleeding, his hands moving with experience. Mara cried softly, overwhelmed by pain and fear, but also by the relief that someone was there to help. She could see his focus, the way he refused to panic even in this tense moment. Time seemed to stretch. The sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustling leaves, the wind in the trees, faded around her. All she could focus on was the pain, the blood, and Thomas's calm presence. His voice, repeating instructions and gentle reassurances, was the only anchor she had in that terrifying moment. Mara's mind wandered briefly to thoughts of her family, her work, and all the small things she loved about life. She thought it might be the end, but Thomas's steady hands and voice reminded her to keep fighting. Her tears fell freely now, not just from pain, but from fear, relief, and gratitude all at once. She had never felt so vulnerable in her life, and yet in that moment, she felt a strange connection to another human being, someone willing to risk everything to save her. As Thomas held the cloth firmly against her chest, he spoke softly, telling her to focus on her breathing. "In and out, slow, slow, just like that," he said. Mara followed his instructions, forcing herself to breathe through the sharp pain. She noticed his determination, the strength in his arms, the kindness in his eyes. He was strong, yes, but more than that, he cared, and that care gave her strength she didn't know she had. For what felt like hours but was really only minutes, Mara lay there, clinging to consciousness while Thomas supported her. He called out for help, using the radio in his pocket to contact someone from the ranch house. He never let go of her, never let panic take over, and every moment his presence reminded her that she was not alone. Mara's vision began to clear slightly as the initial shock wore off. She saw the sunlight through the trees, the soft green of the forest floor, and the anxious but focused face of Thomas. She realized how close she had come to something much worse, and a wave of gratitude washed over her. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the pain and exhaustion made it impossible. All she could do was cling to the cloth against her chest, to the human presence beside her, and to the hope that she would survive this. Even in pain, Mara couldn't help but notice small details. The way Thomas's hands worked efficiently, the way he moved calmly, even in a crisis. The forest around them seemed alive, almost protective in its own way, and the sunlight filtering through the branches made the scene feel surreal, like a moment suspended in time. She realized she had never experienced anything so intense, so raw. and so full of life. Finally, she felt the first signs of relief as Thomas's voice came again. "Help is on the way."
"You're going to be okay." His words were simple but powerful. Mara nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by everything she had been through in just a few minutes.
Pain, fear, and relief mixed together in a way she could hardly comprehend. But she clung to the one certainty she had, that someone cared enough to be there, fully present, in the moment she needed it most. The world seemed to shift around her as she realized that, despite the pain and the shock, she was alive. Thomas's presence, his skill, and his calm determination had pulled her through the first, most dangerous stage of the accident. The forest, the birds, the sunlight, all of it seemed more vivid now, more precious, as Mara tried to focus on breathing and staying awake. And there, in the quiet of the forest, with the rancher kneeling beside her, Mara began to understand something she had never truly felt before. That human connection, courage, and care could shine through even the most terrifying moments. It was a lesson written in blood, fear, and survival, one that would stay with her forever. Mara's chest ached sharply with every breath. The cloth Thomas had pressed against her wound soaked with her own blood. She tried to steady herself, but the fear and shock from the arrow had left her trembling. Her vision was still blurry, and every sound seemed magnified. The rustling of leaves, the soft hum of insects, even the faint crunch of Thomas's boots as he shifted beside her. Despite the pain, she could feel his presence as something solid, steady, and unyielding. It gave her a strange sense of safety amidst the chaos of what had just happened. Thomas crouched beside her, his hands firm and practiced. He studied the arrow lodged in her chest carefully, running his fingers around the shaft without making sudden movements. He spoke softly, explaining what he was going to do.
"It's important that I remove it now, Mara. If it stays in, it could cause more damage."
"I need you to stay as still as you can. I won't let anything worse happen while you're with me." His words were calm, measured, and commanding. Mara clutched the cloth to her chest, nodding weakly. She trusted him because there was no hesitation in his movements, no sign of panic. "On the count of 3, Thomas said, and Mara braced herself. Her stomach twisted with fear. She had seen movies where people were injured by arrows or sharp objects, and she knew how dangerous it could be. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the pain away, wishing she could just disappear from the world for a moment and wake up in a safe place.
1,
2, 3, Thomas whispered. With careful hands, he gripped the arrow and pulled it out. The pain shot through Mara's body like fire. She gasped loudly, tears streaming down her face. Her entire chest felt empty, hollowed by the sharp, unnatural sensation of the arrow leaving her. Her knees buckled slightly, and Thomas held her up, steadying her against him.
"It's out."
"I've got you," he said, his voice calm and strong, though she noticed the faint tremor in his hands. The pain was unbearable, but relief followed almost immediately. Mara could feel the immediate pressure in her chest lessen, though a burning ache remained. She tried to speak, to thank him, but all that came out was a weak whisper. Her lips trembled, and her eyes searched his face, looking for reassurance. Thomas met her gaze and gave a small nod. He gently pressed the cloth against the wound, twisting it slightly to stop the bleeding. He kept his focus on her, never allowing his attention to waver, and Mara realized she could breathe more steadily now. For a few moments, they were silent, save for the sounds of the forest. Mara listened to the wind through the trees, the distant babble of the creek, and the faint singing of birds. It all seemed unusually loud, as though the forest itself was holding its breath with them. Her chest still hurt, but she was alive, and the thought that she had survived such a terrifying accident made her shiver. Then, as her senses cleared, Mara noticed something strange. Thomas's hands, the ones holding her steady, had streaks of red. Not from her, but from him. At first, she thought it might have been a trick of the light or some smudge of dirt, but as she blinked and focused, she realized with a sudden jolt that he was bleeding. "Thomas!" she gasped, the word catching in her throat. Her panic returned with a force stronger than before. The pain in her chest faded slightly as adrenaline surged, replaced by fear for him. She said, her voice trembling. Thomas's head tilted slightly, almost as if he had forgotten for a moment. I'll be fine, he said, his voice firm but quieter now, betraying the tiniest hint of worry. Mara's eyes widened.
No, you are bleeding.
You helped me, and now you're hurt too. She reached toward him instinctively, wanting to help, but her own weakness made her falter. She had just survived a serious injury herself. There was little she could do to assist him. Thomas quickly pressed his hand to his side, realizing the severity of the cut. "It's just a scratch," he said, attempting to reassure her, though Mara could see the red spreading on his palm and the edge of his shirt. He had moved quickly to remove the arrow from her chest, and had inadvertently been grazed by it as it came out. The small movement, combined with the sharp metal, had cut him more deeply than he realized. Mara's heart raced. She had never imagined that she would be in a situation where she would have to worry about someone else while still recovering from her own injury. She wanted to cry out again, but this time it was not for herself. It was for him. She looked at his face, saw the tight set of his jaw, the furrowed lines of concern, and the pale tinge to his skin. The realization that he had risked himself to save her was overwhelming. Thomas, despite the pain, managed a small, almost wry smile.
"See, even when I'm hurt, I can still take care of you," he said.
His words were meant to calm her, but Mara could see the strain behind them. She realized that his courage was not just in action, it was in his willingness to put someone else first. Even at personal risk, Mara tried to stay calm. She pressed the cloth she had just removed from her chest against his side, unsure if it would help much. "Hold this," she whispered, her voice weak. "It's bleeding more than I thought." Her hands shook, but Thomas gently guided her, placing his hands over hers to steady her movements. He appreciated the effort, even if it was mostly symbolic. They moved carefully toward the ranch house, supporting each other. Mara leaned slightly on Thomas's arm, feeling his strength beneath her. She could feel his pulse through the fabric of his shirt, steady but slightly racing, and she noticed the quiet determination in his movements. He didn't rush, but he didn't blinder either. Each step was deliberate, careful, and full of purpose. The forest around them seemed to grow quieter, as though aware of the tension in the small clearing. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Mara noticed details she had missed before: the soft green of moss on tree trunks, the gentle ripple of the stream beside them, the occasional bird flitting from branch to branch. Even in the midst of fear and pain, the world remained alive, vibrant, and oddly comforting. Mara's breathing was still labored, her chest aching with every inhale, but she could see the ranch house now in the distance. It was a small, sturdy building with whitewashed walls and a wide porch. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a comforting reminder that help was near. Thomas moved toward it, guiding Mara as best he could. and called out in a low, steady voice, "Help! Someone here! We need help!" A figure appeared at the doorway, an older woman who had been working in the kitchen. Her eyes widened in shock at the sight of Mara bleeding, and then she noticed Thomas's side. "Oh my! What happened?" she exclaimed, rushing down the steps. Together they helped Mara inside, Thomas leaning on her slightly, his own blood still staining his shirt. Inside, the woman helped Mara sit down, quickly examining the wound. "It's not too deep, but we need to stop the bleeding properly," she said. She worked quickly and efficiently, her hands gentle but sure. Mara felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief that she was being cared for, guilt that Thomas had been hurt while saving her. Thomas stood beside her, his hand still pressed lightly against his side. He tried to smile reassuringly, but Mara could see the tight line of his jaw, the slight pallor of his face, and the tension in his shoulders. She reached for his hand again, holding it briefly. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. "You saved me." Thomas nodded, appreciating her words more than he could say. He had acted instinctively, focusing on the immediate danger, not thinking about his own safety until later. Now the reality of his injury settled in. He allowed the woman to tend to him while Mara rested, both of them bleeding, both of them shaken, but both alive. As the adrenaline faded, Mara's thoughts returned to what had just happened. She had been terrified, in real danger. And yet she was alive because of Thomas. And now, seeing him wounded while helping her, she realized the depth of his courage and kindness. Her tears came again, this time for him, for the humanity they had shared in that terrifying moment. The woman treated both of them with care, applying pressure to stop the bleeding and dressing the wounds. Mara could feel her chest slowly easing, the constant burning ache lessening with each passing moment. Thomas's cut was shallow but had bled more than expected. He gritted his teeth through the discomfort, refusing to complain. Mara reached out to steady him again, and he allowed her, silently acknowledging her concern. They sat together for a long moment, breathing and recovering. Mara felt her body relax slightly, though her mind was still racing. The realization that someone had risked themselves for her made her feel both grateful and humbled. Thomas, sitting beside her, quietly accepted care, even as he remained alert, ready for anything else that might happen. By the time help had fully arrived, additional ranch hands and a local nurse, both Mara and Thomas were stable. The nurse praised their quick actions, noting that the timely removal of the arrow had likely saved Mara from further injury. Thomas, modest as always, simply shrugged. Mara realized she had never met anyone who acted with such calm bravery in a crisis. Even as they rested, the bond between them had deepened. Mara could see in Thomas's eyes the same awe and relief she felt. They had faced danger together, survived it, and in the process discovered a quiet trust and connection that would last far beyond this day. The sun had nearly set by the time the adrenaline wore off completely. The forest outside was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Mara looked at Thomas, the man who had saved her life, and felt a deep gratitude that words could hardly express. She realized that heroism was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and selfless, emerging in the smallest but most meaningful ways. In that moment, Mara understood something profound. Life was fragile, but courage, care, and human connection could shine through even in the darkest, most painful moments. Thomas's actions had reminded her of that, and she knew she would carry this lesson forever. The forest outside the ranch was quiet now, the day fading into evening. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the chirping of birds had quieted as they settled into their nests. Mara sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket provided by one of the ranch hands. Her chest still ached from the arrow, but the immediate danger had passed. Her mind, however, was far from calm. She kept glancing at Thomas, who sat nearby on a wooden chair. One hand pressed gently against his side where the arrow had grazed him. His face was pale, and there was a tension in his shoulders that Mara could not ignore. He tried to act as if nothing was wrong, speaking in short, controlled sentences and managing small smiles when she looked at him. But Mara could see through the facade. "You need to rest," she said softly, her voice shaking slightly.
"You're hurt badly, Thomas. You can't just—"
"Pretend it's nothing." He shook his head gently. "It's just a scratch, nothing serious," he said. The faint wince when he adjusted his position betrayed him. Bah! Mara's heart clenched. She had been terrified for herself, and now she realized the full weight of what he had done for her. Not only had he risked his own safety to save her, but he had also ignored his own injury until she noticed. Mara's hands trembled slightly as she reached out to touch his arm, feeling the warmth beneath the cloth. "You could have lost a lot of blood," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what I would have done if something happened to you. I couldn't let anything happen to you, Mara. I didn't think twice. You were in danger, and I acted. That's all there is to it." His words were calm, but Mara could see the fatigue and strain in his eyes. He was clearly hurting more than he wanted to admit, and the effort of staying upright, speaking, and keeping her calm had taken its toll. Mara felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had survived the arrow, yes, but it had come at a cost. She remembered the moment the metal grazed him, how quickly he had still been focused on her safety, and now she understood the depth of his selflessness. Her throat tightened, and she blinked back tears, wishing there was some way she could repay him for his bravery. The nurse who had arrived earlier, a kind woman with steady hands and an experienced demeanor, came out to check on them both. She examined Thomas's side carefully, lifting the edge of his shirt and inspecting the wound. Mara watched nervously, feeling both fear and admiration. The nurse nodded, her expression serious but not alarming.
"You're going to be okay," she said to Thomas.
"The cut isn't deep, but you need to stay seated and keep pressure on it for a while. No sudden movements. You've lost some blood, but it's not critical." Thomas nodded, giving Mara a reassuring smile. "See? Told you it was nothing," he said, though Mara knew better. She could see the tight line of his jaw, the way he clenched his teeth as he adjusted his posture. He was trying to protect her from worry, but she couldn't let it go. "You're not invincible," she said firmly, her eyes locking onto his. "I know you want me to believe that, but you're human."
You could get hurt too. You need to let someone care for you.
Thomas looked at her quietly for a moment, then nodded slightly. He understood, even if he didn't want to admit it out loud. He leaned back in the chair, resting his hand on the cloth over his wound, and let Mara's concern settle over him like a quiet shield. There was a calmness in that moment, a sense that they had survived something dangerous together and were now beginning to recover. As twilight deepened, the air grew cooler, and Mara shivered slightly under the blanket. She could hear the distant call of an owl, the rustling of leaves, and the soft sounds of the creek flowing nearby. Everything felt heightened, the fear, the relief, the gratitude. Every sense was sharper now that the immediate danger had passed. I can't stop thinking about what happened, Mara admitted, her voice low. One moment I was just walking, taking pictures, and the next, the arrow. I could have. She swallowed hard, unable to finish the sentence. Her hands fidgeted with the edges of the blanket, and Thomas reached out to steady her briefly. "You survived," he said simply, That's what matters.
The rest, we deal with it.
His words were grounding, but Mara could see that he too was processing everything that had just happened. The moment of crisis was over, but the emotions lingered, heavy and raw. Mara's thoughts returned to the precise moment when she had realized he was bleeding. Her fear had spiked instantly, and she remembered the shock of seeing the red streaks on his hands. She could still feel the adrenaline in her chest, the sharp awareness that life could change in an instant. That realization had made her feel closer to him, in a way she couldn't quite explain. A bond forged in the intensity of survival. Thomas noticed her gaze lingering on his hands and gave a faint, almost embarrassed smile. "I guess we both have a story to tell about today," he said quietly. Mara nodded, her lips pressed together to hold back tears of relief and emotion. The nurse left soon after, making sure both of them were stable and advising that Thomas should rest. The ranch hand stayed nearby, offering food, water, and blankets. Mara felt a sense of calm settle over her, though the memory of the arrow, the pain, and the fear remained vivid. She leaned back slightly, taking a deep breath, and tried to process everything. "I don't think I've ever been this scared," she admitted softly. "I mean, I've had minor accidents before, but nothing like this. And then seeing you, hurt because of me." Her voice faltered and she looked down. Thomas reached out, gently lifting her chin so she would meet his eyes. "You have nothing to feel guilty about," he said firmly. "I chose to help you. That's all there is to it. That's what people do for each other. We look out for one another."
That's enough. Mara nodded slowly, absorbing his words.
She realized he was right. The fear, the pain, the shock, all of it was part of survival, and their shared experience had created something meaningful between them. She could feel the tension in her body slowly loosening, replaced by a quiet appreciation for the life she still had, and the courage she had witnessed. Hours passed as the sky darkened and stars began to appear overhead. Mara sat wrapped in the blanket, occasionally glancing at Thomas to make sure he was still seated comfortably. They spoke in low, careful voices, sharing stories about the ranch, their lives, and how unexpectedly life could change in a single moment. The conversation was slow at first, cautious, but gradually it became easier, more natural. Laughter began to seep in, small but genuine, breaking the tension and fear of the day. Mara realized that through this experience she had learned more than just the danger of the forest or the care required in the outdoors. She had learned about courage, kindness, and selflessness. Thomas had acted instinctively, without hesitation, putting another person's life above his own safety. That realization filled her with awe, gratitude, and a deeper understanding of humanity. At one point, Thomas looked at her and said quietly, "You know, sometimes we don't realize what we're capable of until we're tested. Today, we were both tested." Mara nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Fear, courage, and survival had pushed them to act in ways they might not have imagined, and it had created a bond that neither would forget. Mara's thoughts drifted again to her family, her friends, and her work. She realized how quickly life could change, how fragile it was, and yet how precious every moment could be. She felt a deep gratitude for this second chance, for the chance to live, and for the unexpected hero who had stood beside her in the darkest moment. Even as the night deepened, the ranch was quiet, safe, and welcoming. The cool night air carried the scent of pine and earth, and the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves created a gentle, rhythmic backdrop. Mara felt a sense of peace settle over her, mingled with lingering awe and gratitude. She glanced at Thomas again, and he gave her a small, reassuring nod. The understanding between them was quiet but powerful. They had survived together, shared fear, pain, and courage, and now they were witnessing the calm that followed the storm. Mara realized that this moment, this connection, was something she would carry with her forever. A reminder of human bravery, care, and the extraordinary bonds that can form in moments of crisis. She let out a slow breath, feeling her body and mind finally begin to relax. Thomas leaned back, resting, but remained alert enough to respond if needed. Mara's gaze drifted to the dark forest beyond the porch, the faint outline of trees illuminated by the soft moonlight. She thought about the arrow, the fear, and the near tragedy, and then about the courage and selflessness that had saved her life. The night stretched on quietly, both of them aware of the danger they had faced, but also of the safety they now enjoyed. Mara's chest still ached, and Thomas's side throbbed faintly, but both were healing, both were alive, and both had learned something invaluable about courage, care, and trust. In the quiet of that ranch under the stars, Mara realized that life was unpredictable, fragile, and often frightening. But it was also full of extraordinary moments of human kindness and bravery. Thomas had shown her that, and she would never forget it. She felt a profound gratitude, not just for surviving, but for having witnessed such selflessness in real life, for having shared a moment that was raw, real, and transformative. By the time sleep finally took her, Mara knew that this night, the fear, the pain, and the courage she had witnessed would remain with her forever. She had learned the true meaning of bravery, of care, and of human connection, and it had all begun with a single terrifying moment in the forest, a moment that could have ended tragically, but instead had created something enduring, something beautiful. The morning sunlight filtered gently through the curtains of the small ranch house, casting soft beams across the room. Mara woke slowly, feeling the aches of yesterday still lingering in her chest. Her breathing was steadier now, less sharp, and the fear that had gripped her the previous day had softened into a quiet, lingering awe. She sat up carefully, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders, and looked around. Thomas was nearby, sitting in a chair beside the window, his shirt clean but slightly damp from the care the ranch nurse had given him. His hand rested lightly on the cloth that had covered his wound, a faint scar already beginning to form beneath it. For a moment, they both sat in silence, each observing the other. The night had been long, filled with fear, pain, and the rush of adrenaline. But now the quiet morning brought reflection. Mara's eyes met Thomas's, and she saw the same mixture of exhaustion, relief, and thoughtfulness mirrored in his gaze. Neither of them spoke immediately, as if words were unnecessary in the presence of shared experience. Finally, Mara broke the silence. I can't stop thinking about yesterday," she said softly. "About what happened, and about you. You risked yourself to save me." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was honesty and gratitude in it that filled the room. Thomas looked at her calmly, his expression serious but gentle. "I did what anyone should do," he replied. "When someone is in danger, you help them. That's what mattered. You were in more immediate danger than I was. I had to act." Mara shook her head slowly. "But you got hurt because of it. I mean, you were bleeding too. I never realized how much risk you took for me." She paused, gathering her thoughts. I don't know. I feel like I owe you everything." Thomas gave her a small, almost shy smile. "You don't owe me anything. Life doesn't work that way. But we all have moments where we help each other. That's how people survive. That's how we live. You being here, alive, is enough." Mara nodded, absorbing his words. She realized he was right. though it was still hard to shake the overwhelming gratitude she felt. Yesterday had been terrifying, but it had also been a moment of clarity, showing her the fragility of life and the extraordinary kindness one person could show another. After breakfast, prepared quietly by one of the ranch hands, Mara and Thomas spent the morning tending to their minor wounds, changing dressings and checking for bruises or soreness. The nurse had insisted on monitoring them both until the risk of infection had passed, and although neither wanted to admit it, the care and attention made them feel safer. The ranch, normally so familiar and routine to Thomas, had become a place of refuge for Mara, a safe harbor in the aftermath of danger. As the hours passed, Mara and Thomas talked quietly about life, the ranch, and their respective experiences. Mara shared her passion for wildlife photography, the places she had traveled, and the birds she had studied over the years. Thomas spoke about his life on the ranch, his love for the land, and the responsibility he felt to protect it. The conversation was calm, reflective, and filled with a subtle warmth that neither had expected in the midst of recent trauma. Even though he had been injured, he moved with care and attention, never complaining, and always mindful of those around him. There was a gentle strength in his presence, a calm determination that made her feel secure despite her lingering fear from yesterday. She realized that bravery wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and dependable, like Thomas's care for her. By mid-afternoon, both of them were resting in the shade outside on the porch. The sunlight was warm but not harsh, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Birds flitted between the trees, their songs a soothing soundtrack to the slow passage of time. Mara felt the tension of the previous day gradually melting away, replaced by a quiet appreciation for the life she had been given and the courage she had witnessed. "You know," Mara said thoughtfully, "I never realized how fragile life could be until yesterday. One moment everything seems normal, and the next, everything can change." Thomas nodded, his gaze on the distant tree line. "That's true," he said quietly. "But it's also why we have to act when we see someone in need. We can't predict accidents, but we can choose to be brave in the moment."
Mara leaned back, letting out a slow breath.
"I understand that now. And I understand that courage doesn't always mean fighting or being fearless. Sometimes courage is just being willing to act for someone else, even when you're scared." Thomas turned to look at her, a faint smile on his face. "Exactly. And today, you're learning that firsthand. Not just about bravery, but about how much people care, even strangers, when it matters most." The day passed in a slow, reflective rhythm. Mara felt a new appreciation for the ranch, the quiet beauty of nature, and the people who worked there. She noticed the small details, the way sunlight danced through leaves, the hum of bees over flowers, and the distant sound of water flowing over rocks in the stream. It was as if the accident had made her senses sharper, more attuned to the simple, extraordinary aspects of life that often went unnoticed. In the late afternoon, Mara and Thomas went for a slow walk around the property. Her chest still ached slightly, and he kept a steady hand nearby, just in case. They moved carefully along the paths between the trees, listening to the forest and watching the animals around them. Squirrels darted between branches, rabbits peeked from the underbrush, and birds chirped cheerfully, unaware of the human drama that had unfolded just a day earlier. "I've spent so much time outdoors," Mara said, "but yesterday made me see it differently. The forest feels alive in a way I never noticed before. Every sound, every movement, every shadow feels meaningful." Thomas nodded. "Life has a way of reminding us how connected we are to the world around us. Sometimes it takes an accident, a moment of danger to make us see it. They walked in silence for a few minutes, letting the calmness of the forest settle over them. Mara's thoughts wandered to her family, her friends, and the work she still had to return to. She realized that she had been given a second chance, and that the bond she now shared with Thomas was something rare and precious. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple, Mara and Thomas returned to the porch. They sat together quietly, watching the day fade. Mara's chest was still tender, and Thomas's side throbbed faintly, but both were healing. The wounds were reminders of yesterday, but also symbols of survival, courage, and care. Mara finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "I don't know how to thank you, Thomas. You risked yourself to save me, and I can't stop thinking about it. I feel like my life has changed because of what you did." Thomas smiled gently.
You don't need to thank me. Just live your life fully.
That's the best way to honor it. Remember what happened, yes, but don't let fear hold you back.
Be brave in your own way, every day.
Mara nodded, understanding the depth of his words.
She realized that courage, selflessness, and care were lessons far more valuable than any photograph or memory she could capture. They had survived together, and in doing so had discovered a quiet truth about human connection, the kind that endures long after fear and pain have passed.
Night fell, and the ranch grew quiet.
Stars began to sparkle in the clear sky, reflected faintly in the distant stream. Mara and Thomas sat together for a while longer, talking softly, sharing small stories, and occasionally laughing at trivial memories from the past. The atmosphere was calm, warm, and safe, a stark contrast to the terror of the previous day. Eventually, they went inside to rest. Mara's chest had begun to heal, and Thomas's side showed no signs of serious injury beyond a faint bruise and minor scar. Both knew that full recovery would take time, but the emotional weight of yesterday had already lifted slightly. They had survived, and they had done it together. Before sleep, Mara looked at Thomas and said softly, "Yesterday I learned something important."
About courage. About kindness.
About life. And about you. Thomas chuckled quietly. "Well, I hope it was a good lesson. Maybe the most important one you'll ever learn." Mara smiled, feeling the quiet warmth of gratitude and respect for the man who had saved her life. "It was," she said, and she meant it. As they drifted into sleep, the ranch was calm, peaceful, and safe. The fear of the arrow, the pain, and the panic of yesterday were fading into memory, replaced by reflection, gratitude, and a deeper understanding of life. Mara knew she would carry these lessons forever: the fragility of life, the power of courage, and the quiet heroism that could exist in ordinary people when it mattered most. By the time dawn arrived the next day, Mara felt renewed, her spirit lighter, her body slowly healing, and her heart full of gratitude. She understood that life was fragile, yes, but it was also extraordinary, and she knew that the bond she now shared with Thomas, forged in fear and courage, would remain with her always, a reminder of humanity's potential for bravery, kindness, and selfless care. Mara looked out at the forest, the birds, and the wide-open fields of the ranch and whispered softly to herself, "Life is precious, and courage is everywhere, even in the quietest moments." She smiled, feeling a sense of peace, hope, and understanding. The ranch, the forest, the sky, and the stars had witnessed their struggle and survival, and in that witness, Mara realized that life, no matter how fragile, was full of extraordinary moments, moments that could change a person forever.